Hello everyone, Erynn here with a gear talk for you fiddlers out there who are interested in learning a bit about bow shopping. I recently bought myself a new bow and I thought maybe I would say a few words here just about that experience that might be helpful in case any of you are going to look for bows. So a little bit of a backstory. I used to have a more expensive bow that was about $1,000. And unfortunately, I didn't really like that particular bow. And so I decided to sell it. And before I sold it, I had borrowed a very inexpensive bow to just use while I was getting my bow repaired. And I thought it was amazing value, this basic bow. For just $50, carbon fiber bow from Shar. I don't get anything for telling you about this bow. But, for a basic bow, it was quite good sounding and felt pretty good. And you could take it to a festival or play, late at night when it's dewy. And you didn't have to worry about it. It was kind of like a good old car with a few dents in it. And you didn't have to pay it much mind. And they only cost like $50 or $60. So I was, you could buy these inexpensive bows and they play so well and they're such good value. And I've got this expensive bow and I don't really like it. So I decided to sell it. And I ended up just playing these inexpensive bows for the last decade or more. I have a whole bunch of them. But I decided I wanted to look for a wooden bow again because wood just sounds warmer. These do sound nice, these carbon fiber bows. I often find that they bring out a lot of the darker tones on the instrument, but I missed having a bow that brought out some of the warmth and a little more of the vibrance of the upper end of the fiddle. And so I wanted to shop around and look for better bows. I remember in the shop seeing some bows I really loved, but they were always more than I could afford. I remember a Seifert bow that was $3,000 that was beautiful, and I remember a Hill and Sons bow that was really gorgeous that was $4,000. So neither of those I could afford to get. Certainly back then, when I first saw that Hill bow, I didn't even have this fiddle yet. I didn't have a great fiddle that I loved, and so I just couldn't condone spending that kind of money on a bow. But a bow is like, it's not just an amazing piece of art in some cases, but it's also an amazing working tool, and it can really transform the sound of your instrument. It's very important. So I decided to take another look and look at more expensive bows and hope that maybe I could find one that wasn't too expensive but was a lot nicer than my basic carbon fiber bow. Bows come in two main bow woods. The less expensive bows are usually Brazil wood, and the more expensive bows are usually Pernambuco. And Pernambuco is an endangered bow wood. It's an expensive wood. It's hard to make bows. I know a lot of them don't, get finished. There can be defects in the wood. A lot of bows, makers try to make them, but there are some bows obviously that just end up being thrown out because they don't make a perfect. Think how hard it is to make something like this and to get to the final product without any error so that we can play on it all the time. It's really quite incredible. Also, bows go up into the many thousands of dollars and sometimes tens of thousands of dollars because there's art market value to them. So like a Picasso painting, it may be paint on a canvas, but it's made by a famous maker in a certain place at a certain time. And sometimes the materials are expensive with bows. High-end bows can have gold on them, silver. They can have whalebone, ivory. Some of these are not allowed on modern bows, though sometimes they make, instead of ivory, sometimes they use mammoth, which is okay. So your general bows, Brazilwood bows, Pernambuco bows, that's what you're looking at if you're looking at wooden bows. And you should keep an open mind and try things impartially if you can, without knowing, who made it, or whether it's made in larger numbers and in some kind of production. Maybe give them a price range and have them bring out bows that are, at the low and high end of your range. When I went trying bows, I actually tried things that were beyond my range. I tried things, I was looking sort of in the $800 to $7,000 range. That's what was in the cases that they brought me. And I tried about 60 bows. And at first, I just tried to separate bows I liked and bows I didn't like. So I slowly worked through all 60 bows. It took me a day or half a day probably. And I just took my time and I played a little bit on the different bows. And then I just put aside the ones I liked and eliminated the ones that just either didn't feel good or didn't sound good. So there's a few things you can do. Obviously, when you're just hearing the sound, you might play something where the bow, you're playing on every string. And I like to kind of make something up. So I can quickly get a sense of the bow playing across all the strings, so. And if you have a heavier bow, it's going to have a different sound. Often a heavier bow will pull out a rich sound, but it might be more work. Right? Not as responsive because it's heavier and a little more lethargic. Here's a viola bow. So they're several grams heavier than a violin bow. So you see what a nice tone that pulls out of the fiddle, but I have to work so much harder to use it, so I wouldn't want to go that heavy. Just a tip about bows, if you ever see one with a curved frog, see how it's curved at the end? That usually indicates a viola bow. Sometimes people get bows and they don't even realize they're viola bows. Your typical violin bow is about 60 grams. Here's the bow I ended up getting. It's a Marco Raposo bow. That's a company out of Brazil, and it's a Pernambuco bow, and it's got a nice slender stick. Your basic Pernambuco ones that used to start around $400. It's probably a little bit more now. The very entry-level ones were often fatter, so they'd make up for lack of density with a really fat stick. And so in certain cases, I liked the better grade Brazilwood bows, which are the cheaper ones, than the entry-level Pernambuco bows. But once you move up into the better grades of Pernambuco, you get a nice slender stick. Hopefully you want something that's supple. It's got a nice bend to it, but not soft. You don't want to bend your stick and have it go gooey, I've seen bows that will bend a half foot below the bow because they have no strength at all. They're just soft. And you also don't want a bow that's too stiff. There's some that won't bend at all. And I think when you're playing, you need some flex. You also want to look down the stick. You want to make sure that it's straight. So you look straight down the stick to see if there is hair on either side of the stick. If it's all on one side or mostly on one side, then you know the bow's a bit crooked, which can be fixed in the bow shop. But basic bows that are crooked often bend back. If they're just a soft wood, they're not very good quality. They're not always worth straightening if it's a really inexpensive bow. Now you do want the camber this way. That's the bend this way. It's called the camber, and it really helps in the playability of the bow. And if a bow loses its camber, I'll demonstrate on this carbon fiber bow. Lots of little kids, they forget to loosen their bows, and their bows lose the curve completely. Well, these bows with no camber tend to be really bouncy and hard to control. So you don't want that. And in a violin shop, they do put the camber back in a bow. A wooden bow, they would loosen or remove the hair, likely remove it, and then they would take that wooden bow, and imagine there's a little oil lamp here. They would do these little circles over the oil lamp and bend the stick into the desired shape until they get the camber they're after. So that's quite commonly done to put the camber back in the bow. So those are good things. Now, so you want a stick that's supple, not too stiff, not too soft. Then we've already done, you played just long tones. And you look for a bow like this bow I ended up buying, which is a Pernambuco bow, Marco Raposo, handmade bow from Brazil. A great company that also really strives to create sustainable Pernambuco tree forests. So they help foster the growth of new trees because it's an endangered wood. I just noticed it felt really warm and it played really great, and I liked the sound of it. So I also checked to see if it was overly bouncy. So I do this little thing, I test like this, and I go the whole length of the bow. And I get a little more of a bounce just down here. You won't be able to see it, but a lot of bows, they'll just start going, try it with your own bow and see where the stablest parts of the bow are. You go all the way down to the frog, and when you find a bouncy spot, stop there for a second, and you get to know your bow, where it's most consistent, where it has. So there's a little, wood usually has a little bit of a bounce in the stick somewhere. This bow is pretty consistent that way though, so it's not going to work against me, which is really good. Classical players often do spiccato and different things. They test it. So that's bouncing bow, right? So they'll do this. But we don't have to do that much as fiddlers, so it doesn't matter. And of course you can play a fiddle tune. All that stuff is helpful, and try different bows out as you do it. There are other little things you can do. Sometimes in the violin shop, one of the people that work there, they like to tap the bow on their wrist and feel the vibrations going down the stick. So that was something they did. One of my simple tests I like to do, which I think is very valuable, is you hold your bow like this. One, feel how the weight is distributed. Is it really heavy? Like a tip-heavy bow is really hard to play. You don't want all your weight to be here. And bow makers go to a lot of trouble, and they take time thinking about the weights of the grips and the windings on the bow and the tip face of the bow. All of those affect the weight. So if it has a plastic tip face or some of them will have a bone tip face or a silver tip face, they all have a different weight. All of these things affect the overall balance of the stick. And one of the simple tests you can do is I like just holding it like this and flicking the bow upwards and seeing how fast it will respond. Okay? So you don't want one that's tip heavy, and you'll feel this when you're playing too, but this is just a really quick way to feel where that weight is balanced. Usually the balance point of your bow is in the lower third, close, maybe just past the lowest third. So there we go. There's the balance point. Make sure you don't drop your bow. This is my good Marco Raposo bow. This bow was actually quite reasonable. I tried them impartially, but these go for around $1,300. And I got it for $12, which is kind of them. And so I thought that was quite reasonable. I could have fallen in love with a $3,000 bow. Thank goodness I didn't. So I bought it. And I think this is a nice, warm, good sounding stick. So basically, in sum, you want a bow that sounds great. You like the sound of it, but you also want the playability. And you have to balance those because sometimes you'll get a great sounding bow, but it's a bit heavy and that makes it hard to be playable. So you want the balance. You want both great playability and a great sound. And that concludes my gear talk for today. A little bit about bows. Feel free to write me if you have any questions. You can write me at erynmarshall@gmail.com and I'll talk about bows with you more if you'd like. Okay, fiddle on out there.